I remember the first time I saw my father's face turn from amused indulgence to thinly veiled annoyance. I was 12, sprawled across the living room floor, with 4 open computer manuals, a tangled mess of wires, and a hulking beige box I'd cobbled together from spare parts scavenged at garage sales. "You're going to fry the power grid," Dad warned, folding his arms. My mother hovered behind him, arms crossed. "Why don't you go outside and play with the kids in the neighborhood?" she sighed. I pushed up my glasses and grinned. "I'm building a computer, Mom. It's gonna be amazing." Her eyebrow arched. "Amazing how? Promise me you'll watch," I said, tapping the side of my creation. "I'll show you how I can make it talk to my friend on the other side of town. With no phone lines." Dad shook his head. "That's a waste of time. Computers are toys. Toys." I felt a spark of defiance ignite in my chest. Right there on the shag carpet, amidst the detritus of capacitors and resistors. They didn't understand. To me, computers were windows to another world, one where you could create entire universes with code, solve puzzles faster than any human brain, and talk instantly to someone halfway across the globe. But try telling that to people who believed ambition was defined by how many touchdowns you scored, or how straight you threw a baseball. Parents who saw screen time as the enemy, not the future. Over the next few years, their skepticism never waned. My room transformed into what they diplomatically called an eyesore, with 4 monitors, circuit boards taped to the walls like trophies, and shelves sagging under programming textbooks. My friends joked that my parents hadn't seen me outside since the Reagan administration. At family barbecues, they'd pat me on the head and ask when I'd finally get a real hobby. Even at Christmas, the gift of a new graphics card was met with the same puzzled silence. At 16, I dropped out of high school. That was the final straw. "You're throwing your future away," my mother cried, tears in her eyes. "A diploma means something." I hugged her, whispering, "I promise I'll make this work." But as I walked out, I wondered if she could believe me. I rented a dingy studio apartment in the city with the money I'd saved mowing lawns, then launched my first venture, an online bulletin board system where local gamers could coordinate tournaments and trade cheat codes. I called it Net Wars. My parents thought I was working at a video arcade, but real money began trickling in, $200 one week, $500 the next, from subscription fees. By the end of my first year, Net Wars had 5,000 active users, and I was hauling in $50,000 a year. I upgraded my apartment's wiring to handle the servers, and replaced the whirring desktop towers with sleek racks in the closet. Dinner conversations shifted from "why don't you get a real job" to "how's your little side project going?" My mother made spaghetti and left it on the counter with a sticky note, "Don't forget to eat." At 20, I hired my first employee, Sarah, a marketing major from a local college who believed in my vision. "You're crazy." She laughed when she met me at a coffee shop, but maybe in a good way. Together, we turned Net Wars into a true community. We added chat rooms, built a tournament bracket generator, and even launched an online store for rare gaming memorabilia. The revenue climbed steadily, $250,000 that year, then $500,000. My parents quietly opened a joint account, depositing checks I'd send them to pay the electric bill, and I never said a word about it. Still, at family gatherings, the default conversation was baseball stats or college applications. They'd nod politely when I mentioned user metrics or server uptimes. They just didn't get it. My father once asked, "So you're making money from video games?" I shrugged. "From the people who play them." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd end up alone, successful but isolated. I didn't care if they never fully understood. I just wanted them to be proud. By 25, we'd outgrown the studio apartment. Sarah and I signed a lease on a loft 10 times the size and hired 2 more programmers. We rebranded as Nebula Interactive and dove into the burgeoning world of online communities, building a suite of tools for small content creators to monetize their followings. We pitched to investors, and on a crisp autumn day, closed our first round for $2 million. I called my mother from the balcony overlooking downtown. Her voice quavered when I said, "Mom, I just sold 15% of the company for $2 million. There was a long pause. Then she whispered, I don't know what to say. Just say congrats." The next 5 years were a blur. Scaling, pivoting, half-night debugging sessions, investor meetings over French press coffee, hiring top talent, fending off competition. Every time I felt like giving up. Especially when an early competitor sued us for patent infringement, or when 8 servers crashed simultaneously at 3 a.m. I'd remember that 12-year-old kid on the shag carpet who refused to be called a toy. I'd remember my mother's eyes, wide with doubt, yet tinged with hope, and push forward. We launched Nebula's flagship platform, Cosmix, a turnkey tool for creators that combined community forums, subscription management, and integrated commerce. It took off explosively. In the first quarter, we added 100,000 users. By the end of the year, 500,000 celebrities and influencers signed up. We integrated with major social media, and our revenue soared from $5 million to $50 million. I watched cash flow statements, marveling that our simple bulletin board dream had become a movement. Then came the acquisition offer, $2 billion, all cash, from a Silicon Valley titan. The board was stunned. Employees cheered. Even my most skeptical investor wiped a tear. Sarah, who'd grown from co-founder to COO, pulled me aside the night we received the letter of intent. "You did it," she said softly. "They'll call it a tech success story, but this is your love letter to that 12-year-old version of you." When I called my parents to tell them, I rehearsed the words in my head. We sold Nebula Interactive for $2 billion. I held the phone as they took it in, the silence stretching. Finally, Dad said, "That's unimaginable." And Mom whispered, "Our computer nerd." I laughed until I cried. They flew out for the closing ceremony. First class, all expenses paid. Mom smiled at me across the boardroom table, her eyes shining. Dad shook my hand, voice full of pride. "Welcome to the Ivy League, son," he said. As the deal signed, I felt the weight of every sneer, every dismissive comment, every waste of time morph into fuel. Nebula's servers hummed behind glass walls. Employees high-fived, flashbulbs popped as the press swarmed. Outside, the city lights glittered like stars against the night sky. I caught my mother's eye, lifted my coffee mug in a silent toast, and she raised hers, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. We both knew the real celebration wasn't the money or the headlines. It was that the kid on the floor had been right all along. Computer hobby or not, passion could move mountains, and in our case, change the world. When I stepped off the private jet back in our city, the sun was just peeking over the skyline, pink and gold shards stabbing through glass towers. I'd spent the flight staring out the window, rehearsing how I'd greet my team at the launch party later that night. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with congratulatory texts. VCs, old professors, high school friends I hadn't spoken to in years. And there, sandwiched between a note from the governor and tweets from tech blogs, was one from Dad: "Dinner tonight. 7 p.m. Beneath it, a simple heart emoji from Mom. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. $2 billion. A lifetime of work, risk, sleepless nights, and stubborn faith in a 12-year-old hobby now had a number. But until I walked in the doors of my old family home, it all felt abstract, as if the sale happened to somebody else. I arrived at 7 sharp. The front door swung open before I even knocked. Mom stood there in her apron, stained with tomato sauce, her cheeks darker than I remembered, as though life had etched laugh lines deeper in my absence. Dad trailed behind her, in a crisp polo and slacks, his posture a little straighter than usual, as if he too wanted to stand tall in this moment. "Happy homecoming," Mom said, her voice soft, almost trembling. I stepped into the kitchen, and the smell of garlic and basil wrapped around me. "How are you, kiddo?" Dad asked, leaning down to hug me. His smell was a familiar mix of aftershave and cut grass. "Better than I've ever been," I replied, surprising myself with how easy it felt. I hugged them both, Mom's arms warm in her flower, dusty apron, Dad's strong around my shoulders. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the memory of the boy on the living room floor flood back, awkward, determined, fueled by curiosity. We sat at the old oak table, scuffed by decades of me spilling cereal, homework sessions, board games. Mom ladled steaming bowls of spaghetti into my favorite blue and white china dish. "I made your favorite," she said. "With extra meatballs." I grinned. "You're the best." Dad poured wine into glasses. To Alex he proposed, raising his glass with a steady hand, "For making that computer toy pay for our retirement fund." He winked, eliciting a round of laughter. I lifted my glass. "To Mom and Dad, who never gave up, even when they didn't understand." Meek some bid. Mom's eyes glistened. "We're still figuring that part out," she said, voice thick. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You got there, I said. Over dinner, we talked about the sale, how Cosmic's acquisition package was structured, what the escrow timelines looked like, what vesting schedules meant for employee stock. Dad nudged his glass aside. I mean, I'm proud, he said, but I still don't get half of it. I laughed. That's okay. I'll walk you through it. Remember how you taught me algebra by turning it into a baseball field? I'll do the same with this. He nodded, leaning forward. Mom draped her napkin on her lap, eager to learn. We spent the next hour in front of Dad's ancient desktop, now humming like a museum piece, and I showed them revenue curves, user growth charts, all drawn in colorful lines that looked like roller coaster tracks. Mom traced a finger across the screen. So more users equals more money? She asked. I grinned. Essentially, yes. And those users can buy subscriptions, merchandise, event tickets, all flowing through our platform. Dad leaned back, forehead creasing. Still kind of magic to me. That's the fun part, I said. We get to build the magic. That evening, I slipped out to the launch party, an industrial loft downtown rented for the night, filled with our team, investors in cocktail dresses and suits, DJs spinning 8-bit remixes of pop songs, sculptural lighting that flickered like code. I moved through the crowd, greeting people who'd helped me along the way, the first beta tester who found our big bug, the code reviewer who taught me modular architecture, Sarah, the partner in Burnout and Victory, her eyes shining as she hugged me. At midnight, the CEO of the acquiring company stepped onto the raised platform, a tall woman in a sequined blazer, microphone in hand. She told the story of Nebula Interactive with breathless enthusiasm, how it started in a studio apartment, a lone kid with a home-built PC, a dream bigger than his backyard. She credited me with changing the way creators monetized communities. She credited our team with proving that passion and code could build new worlds. I watched from the back of the room, champagne flute in hand, the weight of history pressing behind my eyes. I thought about my parents, how they'd clapped politely whenever I pitched the idea of software or servers, but only now they knew what it meant. I thought of that shag carpet day when I refused to play catch or ride a bike, and instead insisted I could connect to another computer across town. It was a seed that had taken root in hush of the basement. When her speech ended, she invited me on stage. The lights swung up, and our team's applause thundered like an engine. I waved, stepped into the spotlight, and for a moment the whole world felt suspended. Then I spoke. Thank you all for believing when it felt impossible. Thank you, Sarah, for never letting me give up. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for letting me be weird, and for those meatballs tonight. To everyone who's ever called it a waste of time, I hope this shows that what feels silly now can change everything later. I paused, heart pounding, then let the crowd's cheer wash over me. In the days that followed, our story hit every business section. The teen dropout who sold his startup for $2 billion, hobbyist turned tech titan. From parent dismissed to boardroom superstar. I watched the headlines with a mix of pride and surprise, because beneath the numbers, it was still just my passion for messing with code. One afternoon, I sat in my fancy corner office, large windows, a view of the river in my new corporate digs. My assistant popped her head in. Your parents are here to see the new digs. I smiled. Send them up. 20 minutes later, Dad and Mom stepped through the door. He wore a tie. I'd never seen him in one, and she carried a single white rose. They looked around, mouths half open. The office hummed with servers, humming quietly in a glass cabinet, and a touchscreen board on the wall running live analytics. Dad's eyes went wide. Mom's rose trembled in her fingers. I showed them the view, pointed out the minimalist desk I picked, because it reminded me of the one Grandpa had. We stood there a moment, three of us, breathing in the new world I'd built. Dad cleared his throat. Son, I called it a waste of time. He looked down at a framed photo he was holding. A candid shot of me at 15, goggles on, soldering a circuit board. I should have seen how good you were. How important. I shook my head, voice catching. You believed in me when I needed it, even when you didn't understand. That meant more than anything. Mom stepped forward, pinned the white rose to my lapel. You taught us what your world looks like. And it's beautiful. I hugged them both, the city skyline behind me, the hum of servers like applause. That night, I flew home again. Economy, because I wanted to feel the jostle of the plane, the echo of other passengers, the world in motion. I lay back and stared at the overhead bins, thinking about the kid who refused the softball field for the glow of a monitor. I thought about the times I patched code at 3 Summit, the days I wondered if they'd ever let me out of my mother's shadow of doubt. And I realized something. Success wasn't a finish line. It was a conversation I'd been having since I was 12. A conversation about potential, belief, and stubbornness. My parents had listened eventually, and that had changed everything. When I landed, I took an Uber through the old neighborhood, houses with swing sets, the park where I used to trade games on floppy disks, the grocery store whose owner kindly hosted my first server in the basement. Everything looked the same, but the world I carried inside me had grown too big for those streets. At home, Mom left a voicemail. Dream big, nerd. Her old joke. I called her back and said, I already am, and I meant it. In my inbox that morning was a message from a 12-year-old coding chat room I'd frequented once upon a time. A kid with a handle Little Bite wrote, my parents say I should get a haircut and join the soccer team, but I love code. What do I do? I paused, remembering my own shaggy hair, the laughter, the criticism. Then I replied, keep going. Build something. The world needs your code, because that's how the conversation continues. One line of code, one leap of faith at a time. And who knows where it will take us next.